Security policies are required if you're going to be taking credit cards. And also required by, just going through this in the other class, I think Graham Leach Wiley, if you're required to have a security policy or financial institution. This is because of Enron and Arthur Andersen. Enron was a completely crooked company that just stole money from California by gaming the electric system. They stole half the entire GDP of California and transferred it to Texas, and it never came back. And that's why I got in the habit of going to Texas in the summer to learn new high tech, because there was nothing happening in California for several years after that. And they did it part by being through a variety of fraudulent means, although it was legal, because they managed to trick the California legislature into agreeing to a plan to price electricity that was easy to play a game with. So we had signed a contract agreeing to pay these prices, and the prices were not really controlled properly. Anyway, so it ultimately did was not reversed in court, but Enron went down because they forged their accounting. And Arthur Andersen forged their accounting with a completely crooked accounting firm. So rules were passed, and after that, you have to have a security policy and a security financial officer in charge of security at financial companies in America, so they can be audited. And there are other groups that need to have security policies for a lot of reasons, but it's required specifically if you handle credit cards or if you're a financial institution. So you got to have a written document, and this will specify what you do. And it's usually at a pretty high level, stating general goals. Then beneath that, you have guidelines and procedures which have the details. And then you have controls which try to enforce adherence to the policy. So guidelines and procedures tell you what to do. And then at the bottom, you'll have controls like firewalls. You'll have firewalls to block BitTorrent if your policy is. You have a general policy like we don't allow illegal activities on the network. Then you'll have guidelines that will say, in particular, get rid of BitTorrent and get rid of other things like pornography. And then at the bottom, you'll have a step-by-step control that enforces that, like some kind of proxy server or filter or firewall to block that stuff. So here are common things you'll see. A clean desk policy is a common one. It says when everyone goes home at the end of the day, everything has to be off your desk and put away correctly. This is because you have confidential documents and tapes, and you want them all to be locked in their official place. And that way you know that they aren't wandering out of the building. And also, if some visitor comes, they don't see them sitting around and things like that. Policies for account management, like creating and destroying accounts when necessary. Change management is the one that everyone hates, but you have to have it. If there's a problem on your network and you want to just fix it by changing a firewall rule, you can't just do it. You have to say, I propose to change this firewall rule, and I'll go to the review board. The review board will have stakeholders who will argue about whether that's really a good idea, and then we'll have to wait weeks before they say if you can do it. Because it's entirely possible that what seems like a good idea to you, in fact, messes up some other part of the company. And if you don't do this, then before long, you don't even know what you've got because people are changing stuff and not writing it down, so you don't have an updated network diagram with all the details correct. I've known some companies that told me, I can't remember if it was Twitter or Facebook, some big companies have told me that they've just given up on this. And they say every time you change anything, you have to go do a physical audit of the wires to find out how things are because it's too much bother to keep track of it. However, most companies have not given up like that, and they do attempt to keep clean records. Then you have to ask for rules about portable devices, and this one is another big pain point. About 2 years ago, everybody started having iPads and iPhones and MacBook Airs and tablets and all these good things, and they use them at home for their personal stuff, and they want to bring them to work and do their work stuff on them too. And I expected all the security officers to say, no, you must have absolutely none of this. You'll have your work laptop and your home laptop, and never the twain shall meet. And they said, we thought of that. And all the conferences I went to 2 years ago said, forget it, you cannot have that rule. See, if you pass a rule like that, all the good people will leave your company, you'll have nobody left but the idiots, they can't find another job. Because executives find they are so much more productive with their iPad and their iPhone that they say, you just cope with it. I'm going to do it, and it's a security problem, that's what you're paid for, fix it. But I'm not giving up my iPhone. Like Obama wouldn't give up his BlackBerry. They did force him, though, to switch his BlackBerry to a military model, and now there's only 10 people authorized to text him, and he says it's not much fun anymore. But he was on his BlackBerry, and that's why he's president. He was into social networking and social media before anybody else. And he used the internet to organize his supporters, and so being active in the internet was one of the big things that pushed him over the top. Anyway, they've got another policy coming up here. So we talked about clean desk. This keeps your place neat and controls your documents. Otherwise, people are leaving a lot of stuff on their desk, like keys that could be taken and cell phones, leaving computers logged in, printouts, you know, many, many things here that could be a security problem if people don't keep their desk clean. Now, account management includes quite a few issues. One of them is you give people least privilege. You give them only enough privilege to do what they need to do their job. Don't just elevate them all to root, because you can't be bothered to arrange a proper permission structure for the devices in your network. And this will depend on your environment. In Windows and home machines like this, you have discretionary access control, which means every user owns their own machine and they can do whatever they want with the files on that machine. But in role-based access control is usually what you have at companies. People are sorted into groups like help desk, administrator, secretary, manager, and they each have different finance. They each have access to different systems. And as you can see, this is the fundamental problem with bring your own device. You're taking a device into a role-based access control system that is really on a discretionary access control system. So the reality right now is you have your network, and it's got like a financial department where people print checks. I remember I was the database administrator. I could get all the data, I had control all the servers, but I couldn't touch any of the financial systems. They had a whole different system. I couldn't get in there at all. Those people had their own special room, and they were always insulated from all the pressure and stress and rush. It was like church in there. And anyway, now what people have is they have a segregated network like that, and access control, and they also have people bringing in their iPhone, and there's company email and company data on that iPhone, and it's totally out of control. So people are trying to figure out the systems, still in their infancy, of how you properly put your iPhone in the corporate domain, make people log in, and limit what goes on it. But iPhones and USB sticks, iPads are currently a big leak of private data out of companies. So you have to check to see what people are doing with those permissions. In particular, the people with high privileges like administrators, you have to audit to see what the administrators have been doing, because they certainly have the power to do things they shouldn't do, like download copyrighted work and share it at a local torrent on their own network, create unauthorized extra administrator accounts that you don't know about, elevate users to administrators to solve help desk problems without going through the change management process, open unsecured ports on the network so they can have remote access to work. By the way, I must say every network administrator I know has done this, and I think there was a survey, and like 80% of them admit that they have created remote access systems that are not approved by management, because the administrator is constantly on call. It's a very stressful job. Being an administrator is like being a doctor in a country town. You are getting a call at 2 a.m., the server is down, the world is coming to an end, I must have my email, and there's just no mercy. And you can be on your honeymoon in the shower anywhere, it doesn't matter, I must have my email. And so you get fed up with this, and you either have to keep driving to work, or you have to have a way to remotely fix the problem. And your managers and the users have no clue. So you can just tell them whatever you have to tell them. But so they've learned quickly that you do need to have remote access to everything. And if your company doesn't have an explicit way to permit that, they will just do it anyway. It is very easy to put an unauthorized backdoor on the system. And they usually learn a fairly subtle trick like port knocking. You can make a port knocking system, which came from malware originally. So if I want to open a port, like port 22, I can SSH in and control the Unix server, but everybody will find that and come in. If I open it, you can boot to another port, like port 10,000, then it's not sitting there on 22, but people can still find it because they'll just do an Nmap scan and find that port open. So what you do is you put on port knocking. And port knocking says, port 10,000 is where my server is, but it will only open if you first go to port 100, and then port 573, and then port 40,000, and then for 5 seconds it will open up port 20,000. That's what you do. So a certain pattern of packets have to come in, which knocks. It opens the door for a few seconds and you can connect. So people that know the pattern can get in, people that are running a scan can't find it. Malware's been doing this for a long time. They've also systems called single packet authentication, which are similar. You can put a secret way into your network and your boss will not find it, and other network engineers from the outside will not find it. And it is done all the time. It's interesting. I think it's a very interesting survey. 80% of administrators admit they do this, and they know they get fired if their boss found out. And yet they feel like they're going to get fired if they don't do it because they can't get their job done without it. So this is an interesting issue. And it goes all the way to the top, that you have courts and managers that do not understand the technical pressures, and technical people that find ways around knowing that they don't have approval for it. Yeah?
The port knocking is a problem that can detect on the server, right?
Port knocking is just a way to access anything. You can run it.
You have to install software.
You have to install some kind of software, and so it could be found if you did an audit of running processes. That's why if it's not all that subtle, if you really want to hide it, you've got to put in a rootkit. Or a really simple solution is you add an unauthorized piece of hardware to the network. Add an unauthorized wireless router or something. An unauthorized VPN device. That's why I was very surprised with the Chavo, I forget the name of the guy, San Francisco network administrator. He went rogue, locked everybody in San Francisco out of the fiber optic network, refused to give his own boss the password, to send him to prison. Gavin Newsom went to visit him in prison. He was the mayor at the time. He told him the wrong password. He had to come back a second time. He finally told Gavin Newsom the password. And his argument was, my boss is a moron. Nobody here knows anything about security. I can't trust him with the password. And so then, when they gave it to him, they changed the password, and they got some professor from Berkeley on the radio to say, well, that's it. They changed the administrative password, so everything's secure. And I said, what are you talking about? If you had a rogue person in your network, you can't ever say you're safe now. I mean, you don't know what they did. You changed the password. What are you talking about? They could have added 5 devices, strange computers, trap doors. You can't just pretend that changing a password ends all the possible harm from a rogue administrator. Even a good, legitimate administrator will have 5 secret ways back in the network just to get their job done. Anyway, so that's an issue. So you do have to watch what the administrator is doing, because the administrator has the ability to do almost anything on your network. And they tend to get an attitude of feeling superior to everybody and thinking that it's okay for them to do things without permission, especially if their boss doesn't treat them very well, which tends to happen because administrators tend to be messed up people. They tend to be irritable, superior, smug people that are mean to people and have contempt for anybody who doesn't know everything about Unix. And so, of course, their boss has bad relations. So anyway, but what you're supposed to do is have 2 accounts, and this is happening at a major company here. One of my students volunteered to do the PCI DSS compliance there. And if you do PCI compliance to take payment of credit cards, one of the many things you have to do is you have to not have any shared accounts on your network, because you have to have a log that records what everybody has been doing. So if there's a problem, you can say who did what. And this is a huge problem for servers, because as you know from doing your backtrack projects, the way you get anything done on a server is you elevate yourself to root. But you can't have one root account used by 2 people. Each one of them has to have their own separate administrator account with their own separate password. And you also have to have this. They have to have 2 accounts for every administrator, 1 low privilege and 1 high privilege. And you use the low privilege and high privilege accounts appropriately. That's the game. And by the way, this is really useful on Windows networks, because on Windows networks there is a really nasty attack called pass the hash. You don't have to crack the password. When you log in over a network, it sends a hash over the network of the password, and you don't even have to crack it. You can just record it and replay the hash to log in as the administrator. So if the administrator is logged in with an administrator privilege account and they surf the web, you can put malicious code in their website that will cause them to accidentally log into a system on the side without knowing it. So the best practice in Microsoft domains is the administrator should never type in the administrator password to log on at all. They should always log in with their low privilege account, and when they want to do an administrative activity, they do right-click, run as, and run that one command with elevated privileges, but they're not actually browsing the web with a web browser or a machine that's logged in with an administrative privilege. This is what Microsoft tells you to do, and it sounds ridiculous, but in a high-security environment, you really have to do that. And you really have to have logs, and you really have to check to make sure people are doing that, because if you let people log in as administrator and then surf the web, you've opened the door. Anyway, so that's the game here. Another one, what do you do when people leave things logged in? The student was up in the lab. They left their machine logged in with their email. So a guy came by and found it, and I said, well, why don't you send him an email message to tell him to knock it off and close it. Another student did that years ago, and people sent embarrassing emails to everybody they knew, not in my lab, in another lab. And at companies, the rule is if they walk up to a machine and it's logged in, they will lock you out, and some companies, they'll just fire you. It's your obligation to not walk away from a machine and leave it logged in. Anyway, another simple solution is an air gap. There's one of my students works at a company that does financial transactions for really rich people. You have to have like $100 million to get in, and so they have no internet at all. They have some workstations and a local area network. They're not connected to the internet at all. They say if you want to connect to the internet, on your break, you use the Mac in the break room. And it's not connected to anything. It's everything you put in by hand. That's one way to stay secure. When people leave, you've got to disable their accounts, or your disgruntled ex-employees will come back into your network and do rotten things. This happens all the time. Recently, it happened to a guy who rented out worked at a company, and he then deleted all their virtual machines. He had just gotten fired. He went to McDonald's, bought a hamburger with a credit card, then used the McDonald's wireless to go right back to the company that just fired him and delete all their machines. So this was real easy for the cops. The IP address went right to McDonald's. They looked at the McDonald's financial records, and here's a credit card from that guy right there. That's why grudge attacks usually get busted, because they know who did it. Who's the guy we just fired? Well, the suspect list is small. Anyway, so normally you have an exit process, and you should have an exit interview, and you disable their account at this time. The company I worked at, it was very simple. I was the administrator. They would call me. The boss would call me, and they'd get someone to walk all the way to this back room to meet with the boss. While they're walking, the boss would call me, and I'd disable their account while they're on the way. So by the time they go in there and find out they're fired, their account is already disabled. Then they escort them to their desk, take all their stuff and put it in a box, shove them out the door, and that's it. You can't even let them in the building once they're no longer loyal, because anybody in the building could go to a workstation and mess up the database and steal stuff. So we've got a few eye clickers about that stuff. Which of these states goals in high-level general terms? Those are your policies. Policies state general goals. And which item enforces your policies? All right, those are controls. Let's see what this other popular answer is. It's not guidelines and procedures, just tell people what to do. Controls are what makes sure they do it. Things like access controls. What's that?
What about change management? Doesn't it kind of enforce?
Change management might enforce some policies, but not all of them. But the general thing, but a change management might not really enforce it. It might just set the rules. For example, if you don't do it, change management does not prevent you from making an authorized change. It's just the process to make an approved change. You need a control to prevent them from making an authorized change, and that would be something like a password they don't have. Like users at the college might want to run a web server or play a game or download a torrent. If you try to download a torrent here, you can't, because the only way to open that firewall requires a password you don't have. That's a control. So, which item will protect you from disgruntled ex-employees? All right, the main thing that'll do it is account disabling. Yeah, we've got it. Disabling promptly the accounts of people you fire. That's what you got to do. This is why it's kind of bad when people just walk off the job and they don't go through the proper exit process. They call in sick, and actually they hate you, and they know they're going to get fired, and they're looking for another job, and now they haven't exactly been fired yet. This is often a problem. The people that just don't go through the normal exit process, you often forget to disable those accounts. Anyway, right, an administrative detective control. All right, that's the review of rights and permissions. The most popular answer is correct. That is a non-technical thing. You go through and check to see what your administrators have been doing. And then you find out if they've done something wrong. That's administrative and detective. I used to have no respect for administrative controls. I thought where bosses tell you orders and people review stuff. I thought technical controls are where it's at. But portable devices have shown me how I can be wrong. The Android uses technical preventive controls to stop malware from going in the market. They run it through a scanner, and that thing does not work. The Android market is full of malware, and Android phones are affected with malware. Apple's iPhone uses an administrative preventive control. They analyze the apps with humans and only improve them if they're good, and that works. There's no malware in the iPhone. So it can be extremely powerful if you're willing to put in the time to do it. So what will protect you from pass-the-hash attacks? All right, and that's requiring you to use 2 accounts, like I said. Then they're not having extra logins with the administrator credentials anywhere that can be stolen. So I think that's probably enough for today.